Welcome to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of APSATS, the Association of Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists, hosted by Dr. Jake Porter. APSATS is a nonprofit organization providing professional training and compassionate support to partners affected by problematic sexual behavior and betrayal trauma. In each episode, Dr. Jake guides a conversation of enlightening insights and practical tools to empower those affected by sex addiction and betrayal trauma to use their voices and live their values. The mission of Betrayal Recovery Radio is to offer hope to those in need of healing and growth to those moving through grief. And now, here's your host, Dr. Jake Porter.
Welcome to another week of Betrayal Recovery Radio. I'm Dr. Jake Porter, your host. This week, we are going to be hearing part 2 of Unlocking Family of Origin Issues. Like I said last week, during this time of year, the holidays, lots of family time. And for some folks, that's more of a challenge than for others. And so it can stir up all kinds of old scripts in our head, all sorts of old patterns of believing and thinking and feeling and acting. And that can be really confusing, and that can be really hard, and that can be really painful. So last week and this week, you're getting to hear one of the webinars that I've previously done, Unlocking Your Family of Origin Issues, hopefully to help you gain increased awareness, to understand yourself and your partner better, and possibly even provide a platform for your own future growth. Now, if you did not listen to last week's episode, I want to strongly encourage you to go ahead and stop this one, pause it, go back, find last week's, listen to part 1 first. It's going to get you good and set up for the content coming here in part 2 today. And before we start that, let me just remind you that the Association for Partners of Sex Addict Trauma Specialists exists to advocate for betrayed partners and partners of sex addicts, as well as to train professionals who are seeking to be better equipped to work with this population. There are several upcoming trainings that you need to know about, whether you're a coach, a member of the clergy, or a clinician. Get on apsats.org and learn more about those trainings and sign up today, particularly the multidimensional partner trauma model training. One of those is coming up next month in January. So look into that if you've never done it. All right, here we go. The second and final portion of Unlocking Your Family of Origin Issues. I hope this sheds a lot of light on your own story in a way that leads to your own growth and healing. All right, so we're going to walk straight through this. This is going to be a lot of information coming at you fast. Here's what I encourage you to do. Just try to ride the waves with me during my presentation here. Later, I want you to go back later and do the work of trying to pair this with your own experience. Okay, there, I just shared those slides with you. Share that for a few minutes so you can download those. Okay, so the first aspect of the nature of the child is that we're valuable. Every human being is born with inherent worth, no more or less than anyone else. Same as, right? As a Christian, the way I would say this is we all bear the image and likeness of God. We're created in the image of likeness of God. Okay, and so that is our sense of value. Think of a child. So today, my baby turns 1 year old today. All right, and I think about a year ago when she was born. She comes out of the womb. What can she do? She can't earn us any money. She who knows if she's smart or not at that point, right? She can't perform for us. She can't. What's she gonna do? She can't go get a job, but she's worthy. She's got inherent worth. She's invaluable, right? Because it's inherent. And that's true of everybody, and it can't go away. It doesn't go away, even though we think it goes away or we're treated like it's not there. Okay? Uh-oh, someone says they've lost connection. Hopefully that's not everybody. If someone wants to let me know, y'all still have it. I'm going to keep going though. All right. So if you're not treated as valuable with inherent value, not because of your intelligence or your athletic ability or your smart, or your looks or whatever, but just inherent to you, then you'll develop the core issue of going one up or one down, self-esteem issues. Okay. So I feel better than, I feel less than, and that's my core issue. So internally, I'm going to have these negative control issues around trying to earn, secure, and maintain my place. If I feel like I have to perform to stay one up because I'm only safe in relationships if I'm one up, if I'm valued for my performance, that's going to show up, right? Or, and this is kind of sneaky, if I was raised being one down, but that's how I stayed in a relationship with the caregiver, was by being one down to them, then I might make you stay one up. I might keep you on a pedestal because I feel safe feeling one down to you, because that's how I feel like a relationship should be, and that's what I know of relationship. All right? And as I show up in relationships, then the interpersonal symptom there is going to be that I have trouble being same as. I'm going to constantly be going one up or one down. All right? Hope that makes sense. The second aspect of the child's nature is that children are born vulnerable. Again, I think about my daughter being born a year ago, totally vulnerable, right? When she's born, totally in need of protection. And so what we're to do is protect, but we can't protect them in the same way forever. Even today, 1 year later, I don't protect my daughter in the way I did on the day she was born. I had to protect the soft spot on her head and her neck, and right. And now she's, walking around and trying to climb things and all of this kind of stuff. And I still need to protect her, but I need to protect her according to where she is in her development. And as she develops, I need to start to teach her what? How to protect herself. Now, if we're not treated accordingly to this aspect of our nature, we're going to develop boundary issues. We're not going to be able to protect ourselves. We're either going to be too vulnerable because, like we never learned to keep anything from coming in or protect ourselves, or we're going to be completely invulnerable because that's the strategy we adopted. It's just too safe out here to let nothing in. Do nothing, right? Invulnerable. So the interpersonal symptoms here are resentment. Now think about this. You think resentment? Yeah, that's right, resentment. Let's say that my neighbor comes over and says, hey, I need to borrow a cup of milk. Oh, no problem. Yeah, here's some milk. All right, and I give him some milk. And then the next day he texts and he says, hey, still didn't make it to the store. Can I come get another, I just need another 2 cups of milk for this recipe. Yeah, no problem. We got it. My wife, she loves milk. We've always got 3 containers of milk. Come on over, buddy. But then the third day he comes over and he texts again. He's like, hey, still needing some milk. I go, okay, yeah, come on and get the milk. Well, what am I starting to feel? Go get your own milk, man. What's the deal? I'm holding him responsible for a boundary I didn't set. Okay? That's how we get to resentment. Because I expect you to know to just not ask me that or treat me that way. When I'm not saying, no, I'm sorry, we really, now we're down to our last one, and between the 3 of us, that's all we really have. I tell you what, I bet you could go right over there and get you some milk right now at the store. Now, how's that going to show up in relationships? What are the interpersonal symptoms? I'm going to either struggle with enmeshment or avoidance or a vacillation between the two. Enmeshment, no appreciation for where I end and the other person begins, so that their reality I adopt as my own. Or they need milk, I think I can't say no, my milk is their milk, right? Or avoidance. Now he texts and I'm like, I see it's him and I'm not even answering. I'm pretending like I don't see it. Avoidance, because I don't want to be taken advantage of, or I vacillate between the two. So that's the second one. That's the second core issue there. All right. The third is the issue of reality. And the reality is that children are born perfectly imperfect. Perfectly imperfect. Okay. My baby was born, I'd say she was perfect, but guess what? The reality is everyone's imperfect. We're born with a learning curve. We're going to make mistakes. She's going to trip. She does trip and fall as she's learning to walk, right? She's going to eat something she shouldn't eat. She's going to do these things as she learns, all right? We all do. Even as adults, guess what? We still make mistakes. We're imperfect. Well, if I'm not treated like imperfection is reality, I'm going to have issues around the reality of my own person and personhood. I'm going to think that I have to be good and perfect, that my reality is that that's the bar I need to cross. Or I'm going to think that because I'm imperfect, that makes me bad. Therefore, I might as well be rebellious. Okay, so let me give an example here. This is important. Let's fast forward 2 years. So now my daughter MJ is about 3 years old, and we're sitting at the dinner table, and I say to her, MJ, put your seat in the seat, bottom in the seat while we eat. Bottom in the seat while we, I kind of like that. It rhymes. I'm going to have to remember that. Bottom in the seat while we eat. Okay. If you need to sit down, and she's kind of acting up. She's old enough to know what we mean, right? So this is developmentally appropriate. I need you to sit down while we eat, and then we'll play. So I'm being developmentally appropriate, right? And then she doesn't mind, and then she spills her milk. All right. And I say, okay, see, we told you this is what would happen. You need to sit over here and while we clean this up, okay? And we do that. She's crying. We love you. It's okay, but this is why we have you obey us, because these things happen. It's okay to spill your milk, but this is why okay. So we teach in that moment. Well, then the next night, all right, she's obeying, butts in the seat, and just accidentally spills the milk. Just mistake, pure mistake. If I react the exact same way, I'm sending the message there's no difference between misbehaving, right, and making a mistake. That's a problem. That's a problem. We need to be raised knowing it's okay to make mistakes, but it's not okay to use our imperfection as an excuse to violate others. All right. Now, what are the symptoms that come up from this? Well, the intrapersonal, so within me, symptom that I experience is around spirituality. And this is about grace, okay? If I think I have to be good and perfect, this is perfect, and I think I have to clear that hurdle, there is no space for grace here. There is no space for grace here. All right? Versus this is good and perfect, and I know I'm not there, there's plenty of space for grace in that worldview. Okay? Now, what if I think because I'm not this, therefore I'm bad and rebellious? Well, now there's no place for grace anyway. Not open for it, right? I'm not deserving. I'm not worthy of it, which is not what goes against the very definition of grace. But that's beside the point. If you're of that mindset, so I'm not even looking for it because it's not for me. It's not open to me. Okay. Now, the interpersonal system, how this is going to show up in relationships, is dishonesty. Dishonesty. Why? Because the reality is I'm not perfect. So if I think I have to be perfect, of course I'm going to be dishonest. Of course I am. What other option do I have? I can't show you that I'm imperfect if I think I'm supposed to be perfect. Or if I'm bad and rebellious, my dishonesty is just a part of who I am. It's what I do. I can't remember not being that way. All right. So that's the third issue. The third of 5 is the issue of reality and being imperfect. Fourth issue is around dependency. So, great point, Bob. This is reinforced within some churches. Yeah, very rigid, legalistic faith communities can definitely reinforce those issues. Thanks, Bob. So the fourth one is dependency. Again, think about that little baby. Day she's born, totally dependent. Can't do anything for herself, right? Okay, so every single child born dependent. So we need the caregiver to meet our needs, meet our wants, teach us the difference between needs and wants, show us how to meet them appropriately, model for us what that looks like so that as we get older, we can do that for ourselves in healthy ways. If we don't get that, we're going to have dependency issues. And here it's a little bit different than the others because there are 3 flavors. I can become too dependent, where I can't do anything for myself, anti-dependent, okay, where I never ask for help, or needless wantless. I'm not even in touch with my needs and wants. So I can't be too dependent to get them met. Can't be interdependent because they're not even on my radar, okay? The intrapersonal, so within myself symptoms here, are things like physical illness and mental health issues and addictions and anxieties because I'm not taking care of myself, not going to the dentist, or I'm not, whatever it is. No one will make the appointment for me, too dependent, or I don't need to go get my checkup done, anti-dependent, or not even on my radar to get my teeth checked, needless wantless. The interpersonal symptoms that show up in relationships is that we have a hard time maintaining healthy interdependence. Asking for help, asking for needs and wants to be met, meeting others to their needs and wants in healthy ways, right? Understanding interdependence. For those of you who are Christians, there's a verse it's in Galatians, right? A couple of verses in Galatians. It says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And then like 2 verses later, it says, each one must carry his own load. And that used to confuse me. What's the deal here? Bear one another's burdens, but then each one must carry his own load. Well, what I learned is that those are shipping terms. A burden, very specifically, is something like cargo on a ship that's going to require a team of people to get it on or off the ship. A load is specifically packed for one man to be able to carry. So do I know the difference between burdens and loads? Do I ask for help when I have a burden? Do I do it myself when I have a load? Do I take on other people's loads like their burdens? So it's those sorts of issues. And the last aspect of the nature of the child is that children are spontaneous and open. So there's that little baby, and guess what? Crying coming out, no containment of the crying, right? Drool, poop, pee, flailing arms and legs, totally spontaneous and open. That's how we're all born, and we need containment boundaries. The very first boundary that a child ever experiences is latching for breastfeeding. That's the first form of containment, and it saves their lives. It keeps them alive, right? They learn that boundaries are life-giving. Or they should anyway. That's what they should learn. Well, if we're not treated accordingly, if we're not raised learning how that, you don't run and scream at the funeral home, but you do it out on the playground, okay, then we're going to have moderation issues of being either out of control, like we can't even control ourselves, or so controlling that we try to control others. So what are the symptoms that emerge here? Well, the intrapersonal symptom inside myself is around intimacy issues. Okay, intimacy issues like too much, too fast, or not enough. Here's what I mean by that. I can't let myself out. I have a fear of being intimate with you. I can't let myself out. I'm too walled in, and so I'm not really known. I'm hiding too much of myself. I'm not letting you see me out of fear, or, well, it could be a lot of different reasons. Okay, or the flip side of that, it's a first date and I'm telling you my entire life story down to the nitty-gritty, dirty details that, aren't appropriate at this point in the relationship. Okay, so intimacy issues. And interpersonally, the symptom is confusion of intimacy for intensity. So if I'm feeling intensity in the relationship, I think that's intimacy. Does that make sense? So feeling all these feelings, I think that means I'm connected and known. And that's not true. That's not true. All right. So we've got these aspects of our nature, and then what emerge when we're not treated according to our nature are these core issues. And I've got them all here, and this is visually to help you see it's about falling to one extreme or the other. Less than or better than. Too vulnerable or invulnerable. Bad and rebellious or good and perfect. Too dependent, or I could put needless wantless on this side as well, or anti-dependent. Totally out of control like I can't control anything, not even myself, or I'm so uptight I'm not content controlling myself. I also want to control everybody else as well. And what we know is that the healthy range to live is in the middle, to not be stuck like rigidly, because situations require we slide around here. But if this is a 0 to 10 scale, I don't want to live my life with my set point at 0 or 1 or 2 or at 8 or 9 or 10. I want my set point in life to be like 4, 5, 6, right in there, in the middle. Okay. And yeah, I may slide around as appropriate to the circumstance, but I'm doing it, from a place of flexibility. Okay. Now we're going to talk about what is the inner child. Okay. So I just gave you the 30,000 foot view of how core issues develop. Now we're going to take it a step further and talk about the inner child. So relational trauma reaction as inner child. Neural networks made up of, hear this, constellations of core issues. So these core issues here can come together as constellations, all right, from which emerge these dysregulated, disintegrated self states that are activated by particular internal or external cues. All right. So it's not just that this external cue, for example, activates me feeling less than. That feeling of less than is also connected to this constellation of other core issues, like being too vulnerable, have to be good and perfect, needless, wantless, and overly controlled. Okay. You see what I'm saying? So it's not just that one of these issues emerges at a time. When one gets activated, it's probable that a whole set of others get activated, and those together, the constellation together, forms this self state that is disintegrated and dysregulated. It's separated from the rest of who you are, the whole of who you are. Now, these relational trauma reactions are, in essence, ways of surviving our childhood environment through adaptation and safety seeking. So these constellations of core issues, this is going to make more sense here in just a minute. These constellations of core issues are ways that we figured out how to survive or adapt and feel safe when we were young. So they are strategies for relational safety encoded in our implicit memory, activated automatically and non-consciously by associated cues. So they get, yes, Becky, it's a lot like internal family systems, if you're following our chat there. In fact, Richard Schwartz, who created internal family systems, I heard him speak a few years ago, and he said that the model closest to his model of internal family systems is PMLD's post-induction therapy model. So you're dead on, Becky. Good job. So these are strategies for safety, but they get activated without us knowing it, okay, and automatically by these other triggers or cues. Okay. So to back up a little bit, I'm saying this is a reaction to an environment in which we had to adapt. Optimal development is going to happen when the adult caregiver tends to the child. So the flow of energy is from the flow of energy and nurturing and all that is from the parent to the child, and the parent's other job is to create an environment conducive to the nature of the child, right? Appropriate to the child. Children, for example, because I get a lot of these stories with my clients. Children don't need to be turned loose in homes where pornography is lying around all over the place. That is an environment that is not conducive to the nature of the child, for example. So optimal development, the caregiver is going to create this environment that is good and safe for the child and going to be pouring into the child, energy flowing to the child, nurturing of the child, okay? That's optimal development. Deficient development, in other words, what's going to create developmental deficits instead is when caregivers take from the child or don't pour into the child and or don't adapt the environment to the child, but expect the child to adapt to the environment. Okay? So in other words, one form of this is enmeshment. In enmeshment, the caregiver is taking from the child. Now, there are two forms of enmeshment, more than two, but like thinking in terms of big categories, two big categories for enmeshment that are important to understand. The first is what is thought of as positive enmeshment. I don't like positive because it sounds like it's good, but it feels good. All right. It's where, for example, the child is the parent's best friend. All right. The teenage daughter and the mother, who are more like best friends than mother-daughter. Okay. The parent who is living through the child's sports activities in such a way that there's no distinction between the child and the parent. Okay. That's enmeshment. And we might think, oh, that's just really active parenting. Not if there's not a respect for where the parent ends and the child begins. Negative enmeshment is more obvious. It's any form of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. Excuse me. These are enmeshment because you think abuse is going toward the child, but it's really the parent is using the child, taking from the child in that scenario. Okay, taking from the child. All right. Or abandonment and neglect is there. So there's enmeshment or abandonment / neglect. So this would be where there's just no, there's not that direct abuse, okay, but there's also not the pouring in either, and the attention is going elsewhere. So, as I said, certain constellations emerge as certain types of inner children. The first one to cover here is what is called the wounded child, and this goes from birth until about the age of 3 or 4. It's really about language acquisition. When your brain gets to a certain point of language acquisition and mastery of language, it changes the way your brain encodes memory, and it sets you up to be able to adapt to your environment. Before that point developmentally, you can't adapt to your environment. You're wholly passive to your environment. So a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old can't come up with conscious strategies of learning how to adapt to the environment. Okay. So the wounded child, think of like a 2-year-old that experiences neglect or abuse, and they're egocentric, so they internalize it as being less than. They're too vulnerable because a 2-year-old is too vulnerable. Bad and rebellious because it's their fault. Too dependent because they're completely dependent at that point in development, and out of control because they don't have any containment ability. That's the reality of a child at that stage of development. Well, if trauma happens at that stage, and we have in our brains, in our implicit memory, this neural network of trauma reactions and core issues, when that gets activated, this is how we're going to show up. Overwhelmed, passive, like doing nothing, and kind of dissociative. So when I'm working with a couple, for example, and let's say the wife is really angry, and maybe she has good reason to be angry, but when she, shares her anger, the husband, it's not that he just ignores it or doesn't like it or disagrees or from that narcissistic place wants to deflect or whatever, but he like overwhelmed, like power off. That is likely a wounded child reaction. Okay. That is likely a wounded child reaction. Okay. Now, that one's set apart because of the developmental distinction of what's going on at that age. After language is mastered, now the child can come up with strategies and learn ways of adapting to the environment to take care of themselves. Strategies for relational safety. So the first one here is the hero child. This is the falsely empowered child. Can a child actually care for an adult effectively? No. But the hero child, it's implied, sometimes it's made explicit, usually it's implicitly implied, all right, that they take care of the parent. The parent needs them and they take care of the parent. So the core issues for the hero child are just opposite. Better than, one up. Okay, they're one up. Invulnerable because they help you. They don't take help from you, right? Like they're not letting anything in. You're not getting here to see their reality. Good and perfect. This is a distinct good and sense of being good and perfect that comes from caretaking. I'm good and perfect because I take care of you. I'm good and perfect because I meet your needs. Anti-dependent, again, I help you, you don't help me. And controlling of others. They're the self-appointed leader in a group situation, okay? I can do it. Oh, do it, and then they'll tell others, do it this way, not that way, all right? That is the hero child. As an adult, they're going to show up unavailable, passive-aggressive, and they're going to appear all-powerful, okay? All-powerful. So this is... I can have a hero child sort of reaction. This isn't all bad. Let me say, this is adaptive at times, right? It just becomes bad when we over rely on it. It goes from being adaptive to maladaptive. But I'm in a little bit of a hero stance right now, right? Not entirely, but a modification of this as the presenter, and I've got the answers and blah, 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 right? Okay. The last thing I want to say about the hero child is that they parent themselves with criticism. So when you're in hero child mode, if you have a hero child trauma reaction, when you're in that mode, your internal voice is going to be criticizing self and others. We have a question here. Can a person display wounded child in some instances and hero child in others? Absolutely. Remember I said earlier, you can have different self states because you could have been treated differently at different times by different people. So say you were enmeshed with mom, okay, and a hero child with mom, but you were this next one, lost child with dad. We'll go over lost child here in a second. Put you in a room with women, you might show up as hero child. In a room with men, you might show up as lost child. All right. There's another question privately to me. Does the wounded child show up unavailable? They're actually are passive. It could be. It really could be. I'd want to see it myself and get in there and work on it. Okay, the second or the third inner child here. So we looked at wounded child and then hero child, now lost child. The lost child is the disempowered child. This is the child where I drew the line up and down. No one pouring into this child. This child was neglected, therefore they parent the self with neglect. How do they show up then? Less than. They're going to alternate back and forth between being too vulnerable and invulnerable. The lost child, it's like they have their danger filter in backwards. In the situations where they need to be more guarded, they're less guarded. And when the situations where they're really safer and could let their guard down, they're more guarded, typically. They feel like they have to be good and perfect, but this is a different good and perfect. This good and perfect is from performing right, getting it right. So when the child heard from the parent, oh, little Johnny's so great. We never have to get on him to do his homework. He cleans his room right away. He plays with himself so well. He's no trouble at all. He's not like this child who needs our attention all the time. What little Johnny's hearing is, they love me and I'm safe here because I don't need them, because I do it on my own, because I do it good enough myself. And so they feel like they have to be good and perfect as in perform, get it right so that they're not needed. That's the lost child. And so they feel needless, wantless. They're not in touch with their own needs and wants largely because they haven't had the experience of having them mirrored and being taught what they are and having those needs and wants met. And then they are, get this, out of control with being manipulatively controlling of others. So they are kind of passive aggressive in how they get things done. They're in a very manipulative way. Why? Because they can't come right out and ask for it, because they're needless, wantless, and because they have to be good and perfect and not have needs. And so they try to get their needs met in manipulative ways. So they show up yielding and enabling, but they're really passive aggressive. They appear powerless, but actually they're trying to pull strings behind the scenes. That is the lost child. And lastly is the scapegoat. All right. This is the falsely empowered, disempowered child. This is the child
who is raised to believe that they are the problem in the family, and if they would just get fixed, the whole family wouldn't have any problems anymore, which is a false empowerment. It's a disempowerment of the child because they're the identified problem, but they're a problem of such magnitude, they're supposedly told, that it's a false empowerment. They have a false sense of the amount of power they have being disempowered. All right? And being the problem. Okay. Another private question. Voiceless child, I would say, would be like the wounded child, most likely. Now, core issues for the scapegoat: less than, because they're not worth as much as everyone else; invulnerable, they are walled off, not letting anyone in; bad and rebellious, because they're the identified problem; too dependent, though, because they're going to need you to bail them out, they're going to need you to fix their car, give them the gas money, whatever it is, they're going to need to be rescued. And guess what? The system needs them to need to be rescued. I'll get to that in a second. And totally out of control. No containment boundaries, just out of control, acting out, all of this. The addict part of the self is often the scapegoat part of the self. Okay, now, one way to really understand the scapegoated child is to understand the origin of the term scapegoat, okay? So understand the origin of the term scapegoat. It's from the Bible, all right? In the book of Leviticus, on one day a year, the Day of Atonement, the high priest, there were a couple of main offerings they would use or have to do. One of them was called the scapegoat. And the high priest, in front of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, all right, the whole nation, would get a goat, put his hands on the head of the goat, and confess the sins of the people over the goat, symbolically placing the sins on the goat. They take the goat to the city gates and turn the goat out into the wilderness to bear away the sins of the people. That's what the scapegoat does for the family. You're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem. So they become the problem, and guess what? Now I don't have to look at my stuff. So you've got the kid who's been to rehab 8 times, but he keeps coming home, and parents won't send him to a halfway house or a sober living environment, bring him right back home, and the parents are actually functional alcoholics, and they're not willing to set boundaries with themselves or him. They're not willing to put up the alcohol and stop drinking themselves. No, he should do better. He was just in rehab after all for 120 days. And so they bring him home, and guess what he's going to do? Relapse. And what does that do? It keeps the parents from looking at their own problems. That's kind of an extreme example, but that's how it typically works out. Okay, I see I missed a couple of questions here. At what age does this solidify? It solidifies in early adulthood, anywhere from, say, 16, well, actually earlier than that, 13 up through about 26. And can you be enmeshed in marriage without being enmeshed in childhood? I'm not going to say you can't, but I'd be very curious about that. Can I pre-order your book? Bob, I am working on a book this fall that hopefully, good Lord willing, will be out next year. Y'all pray to that end. Okay, so what's the goal? So I'm walking around with all these inner children, and I'm having all these trauma reactions, and I don't even know I'm doing it, and I'm showing up, and all my core issues are coming out. Well, the goal is to become a functional adult. Well, what's the functional adult? Well, think right down the middle of all those core issues. The functional adult esteems the self and others from a place of inherent worth. The functional adult is able to protect the self with healthy, appropriate boundaries that I move to be appropriate to the situation. The functional adult accepts the imperfection of myself and others without using it to abuse others or as an excuse to violate others. The functional adult is able to ask for needs and wants in appropriate ways and to give help to others in appropriate ways. And the functional adult is able to moderate and contain expressions of self, again, appropriate to the situation. So even right now, I'm containing because there are 35 people on this call, and there are, I think, 70-something more who bought it and who are going to watch the replay of it. Well, if it were a group of like 4 of you here in my office and we were doing this in an intensive, I'd be sharing more from my own story about this stuff. But I'm containing because I'm a functional adult, and all of my stuff doesn't need to be out on the internet, right? So the goal is to become a functional adult. That's what we want to do. So how does it happen? How does it happen? Well, it starts with boundaries, okay? In a minute, I'm going to describe the actual work that I do during a family of origin intensive. But that work, really, you need to do it with a trained therapist or trained helping professional who knows how to walk you through it. But there are things you can do on your own. And the starting place is boundaries. Why? Because it's really hard for me to go, oh, I see that I feel less than. I better just start feeling same as. Well, that's not how it works. You can't just start feeling same as, or, oh, I see now that I think I have to be good and perfect all the time. And the reality is I'm imperfect. I think I'll just start being okay with being imperfect. If it were that easy, I'd be out of a job. All right. It's not that easy. But you know what you can do, even if you still feel less than, even if you still feel bad, or you still feel like you have to be perfect, or even if you still struggle with this or that, you can change your behavior. You can still change your behavior, even if your feelings haven't caught up yet. So the thing you can start doing today is boundaries. Boundaries are the behavioral changes that set us up for new experiences of self and other. When I start to change the behaviors around boundaries in relationships, I start to experience the relationship itself differently. And as I experience the relationship itself differently, guess what? My internal working model of self and other changes. It begins to shift. Now, I'm not saying start walking around going, you can't talk to me that way. You quit wearing purple socks to the office. That's not what I'm saying about setting boundaries. The most important boundaries we ever set are internal boundaries that we set inside ourselves that may never even actually be spoken aloud to another person. And what I'm talking about here is what we call protective boundaries and containment boundaries. Protective boundaries are my responsibility to protect myself from you. Containment boundaries are my responsibility to protect you from me. So it could look something like this, okay? It could look something like this. I normally, let's say, I'm totally making this up, but let's say that I normally go home and talk to my wife about, no, that's not a good example, because I tell my wife everything except client details. But how about my best friend? Let's say I normally tell my best friend all about, like, what's happening with this other group of friends I have and blah, 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 blah. And what that does is I'm actually using that to, like, feel kind of one-uppish and look good in his eyes and this sort of thing. So what I might do is establish a containment boundary where I'm not going to talk about other people's, I'm going to make myself not talk about that anymore. I actually did this several years ago with someone in my life I'm really close to, where we used to talk bad about people. That was part of what we did. And I just quit participating in those conversations. And it was really hard and really a struggle, but it changed that relationship. Eventually, I was able to say, for the better. And it changed the way I experienced myself as well, because I wasn't having to get a sense of one up by doing this, talking about people. That's an example of a containment boundary you can start setting today. Or how about a protective boundary of, you know what, this person consistently takes advantage of me and I never say no. I'm going to start saying no. How about a containment boundary and protective boundary that looks like merely having integrity around your schedule and your sense of, self-care? So that means I'm not going to work past this certain hour, and I'm going to say no when I'm asked to do so. That's both a protective boundary and a containment boundary. And when I start to practice these boundaries, things change. I meant to put this up a minute ago. I actually did a webinar on boundaries a couple of months ago. And if you didn't see that, I want to offer that to you today for 50% off. And I've just put that offer there, so it's up for the next couple of minutes. If you're interested in hearing, I don't know how long it was, 90 minutes, I think, on boundaries, I want to encourage you to grab this webinar. There's a coupon code there, half off. Just put half off like it's one word in the coupon code space, and you can get it for 50% off today. If you're like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to start making these changes, that's a great place to start. All right. Okay. So here's the last thing I wanna say before I give you just some particulars about what this looks like in the therapy office. We are formed in and by relationships. We will be transformed in and by relationships as well. Bob and Becky, you have it already. So we're formed in and by relationships. We're going to be transformed in and by relationships as well. That's how we're created. If you're coming from a Christian standpoint, what was the first thing God said was not good? That man would be alone. How are we created? In his image and likeness. He who exists as a relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So relationships are key. They're critical, but they have to be relationships that are healing. And so sometimes that means other relationships have to end, okay, or change, or become more boundaried, or we have to change how we show up in certain relationships. And it has a formative effect on us, okay? So this takes place in relationships. One of my favorite places to do this with people is in the family of origin intensives that I offer. We actually just did one last week with women. It was so powerful. It's 3 days long. And over those 3 days, we do a lot of education. What I just learned or taught you guys, we spend a full day unpacking for people, helping them apply it to their own lives. Then we spend 2 days doing experiential work of finding those inner children and seeing what they need and learning to reparent the self, which is really about what? Being a functional adult. Recognizing those trauma reactions as they happen and learning how to behave differently. I explained earlier how these things are really encoded at the level of our implicit memory, right? The level of our implicit memory. It's like muscle memory. Well, how does that change? How do we change muscle memory? This is a silly story, but this is the one I share. So I play the piano, but I was largely self-taught. I took lessons off and on through my childhood and teen years, but largely self-taught. And so I get to college, and I'm a music major, and I sit down with the piano professor, and he puts a sheet of music in front of me, and he says, well, play this. Oh, I can play that. And I start playing, and I think I'm doing a great job. And he goes, oh, play these 4 measures again, right here, these 4. And I go, oh, okay. And I'm like, nailed it. And I look over, and he goes, oh, no, this measure, play it really slowly. And so I do, and he goes, he's just aghast. Who taught you your fingerings to your scales? I said, what do you mean? He said, play an E flat scale, or A flat, or whatever key it was in. Oh, okay. And I played all the right notes, but not with the right fingering. And he said, who taught you your scales? I said, nobody. I just figured it out on my own. I mean, I don't know. He said, we're going to have to go backwards. You have to relearn your scales. If you don't, there will be a ceiling on the development of your technique that you'll never move beyond. And sure enough, I had to go back and play pieces, learn pieces of music that I could have played, but I would have been doing it in an incorrect way, not the best way. I had to go back and learn to play it with this new fingering, this new technique. How did I do that? Well, 3 steps. Number 1, what was happening implicitly had to be made explicit. I had to know what was going on. Okay, so there was this faulty way of doing it, but I didn't know it. I had to know it. Well, he did that. Step 1. All right. Step 2, I had to choose to do something different, and it was hard. It was hard. And I chose to do it differently. Step 3, I had to do that over and 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 over again until that new thing got encoded at the level of my implicit memory. Same thing here. We have to have a light shown on where these trauma reactions are happening. We have to know that they're happening because we largely don't know that they're happening. Number two, we have to figure out the better thing to do and work really hard to do that thing. And we have to do that over and over and over and over and over again until that new reaction becomes encoded at our implicit memory, which is really about saying our set point, our self state has actually become integrated and regulated with the whole of who we are.
You've been listening to Betrayal Recovery Radio, the official podcast of AppSats. If you've received help or hope from this episode, I encourage you to share it with someone you know. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite listening platform. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Jake Porter, and you can always email me directly at jake@appsats.org. I'd love to hear your ideas, questions, or comments about the show. Until next time, keep choosing to use your voice and live your values. It's good for you and for this world.